I'm Uncle Jay, coming your way with A Penny's Worth of Character by Jesse Stuart. Shad, what happened to that flour sack with a hole in the bottom? Mom asked me. Mom stood before me, pointing a shaking finger. Her lips trembled when she spoke, and there was a frown on her face. "Answer me, Shad," she said. I moved my feet restlessly over the stone doorstep. I looked down at them, because I couldn't look up at Mom. "Did you take that flour sack to Mr. Conley's store?" she asked me. "Mm-hmm," I said. "I thought I told you not to take it." "You did? Then why did you do it?" "I don't know." But I did know why. I hated to confess my wrong to Mom. Mom saved the paper sacks after we used the meal and flour, and after she had saved 10 sacks, she would let me take them to the store to exchange them for candy. Mr. Conley allowed me a penny for each sack, and with 9 sacks I could only get 1 chocolate bar and 4 drops of chocolate or gum candy. That's why I took the sack with the hole in the bottom. That made 10 sacks, and Mr. Conley gave me a dime for them. That meant 2 big bars of candy. But I couldn't explain that to Mom. "Did Mr. Conley go over the sacks to see if any had a hole in them?" "Yes, he did," I said. "Why didn't he find the hole in that sack?" she asked me. "It was big enough for me to put my finger through. I don't see how he could have missed seeing a hole as big as that." "Mr. Conley couldn't have missed seeing the hole if he had done all the sacks like he did the first 4 or 5 on top of that stack." He put his hand back in a sack to open it. Then he held it up toward the sunlight that filtered through the store's small window, and putting his face to the opening of the sack and looking back through it toward the light, he could have seen it. If there had been a hole as big as a pinhead, he could have seen it. "These sacks are all right," Mr. Conley told me after he'd looked at 4 or 5. "No use going through them all." But I didn't tell Mom that I put the sack with the hole on the bottom of the stack. I couldn't tell her now, the way she looked at me. She had gone over the sacks herself before I started to the store, and had thrown the useless sack out. And she had told me not to take that sack, for it wasn't any good. But just as soon as she went into the kitchen, I picked it up to make my 10 sacks. Mom didn't find out I'd taken this sack until I was well on my way to the store. "But, Mom, he didn't look through them all," I said, "and he didn't get the bad one from the sacks that he held up to the light." "You're lucky," Mom said. "But didn't you know that you were cheating Mr. Conley for a penny?" "Yes, Mom," I said. "Then why did you do it?" "I don't know," I said. "You know, I never taught you to do things like this." "Did I?" Mom didn't say another word. She turned and walked back to the kitchen. My thoughts spun round and over in my head, for I wondered what she was going to do now. I didn't have long to wait. Mom came back immediately with a new sack. "Let this be a lesson to you," Mom said. "Take this sack to Mr. Conley to replace the no-good one. Tell him what happened." "But, Mom," I said, "I can't do that." "You will," she said firmly. "But won't you whip me and let me stay here?" I begged as I began to cry. I didn't want to face Mr. Conley and tell him what I'd done. "Go back and make things right," Mom said. "It will give you a good feeling within yourself. You will think before you do it again." I stood before the door, crying. I didn't want to go back. "Dry your tears and be on your way." There wasn't anything for me to do but to turn and go back to the store, carrying a little light paper sack. It was worth only a penny, but I had 2 miles to walk there and back. I walked down the road with the sack under my arm. I turned to look back to see what had happened to Mom. She was standing in the door, watching me walk slowly under the August sunlight down the hot, dusty road. Early in the morning, when I had started to the store with my 10 sacks, the world had belonged to me. The redbird's song sounded as sweetly from the crab-apple thickets as their first songs in the early spring. Cool shadows had stretched across the road from the tall roadside sycamores, and the wind from the black gum leaves had been cool and fragrant to breathe. The buttercups growing alongside the creek, which flowed beside the country road, was fresh and filled with dew. The wild touch-me-nots stood erect, and their blossoms gave a pleasant aroma. Often the road wound from one side of the hill to the other, crossing the clear, winding stream. And when I had waded across this stream, I had stood watching the swarms of minnows come up to the surface for a fly I threw in the water. I watched the crawdads swimming backwards, pulling themselves with their fin-shaped tails when I touched a rock under the water with my toe and disturbed them. My journey to Mr. Conley's store early in the morning, when I was taking the 10 sacks, was a pleasant journey. But now my world had changed. I dried my eyes the best I could with the back of my hand. I looked at the leaves on the tall sycamore that now hung like wilted pepper pods. Tall shadows no longer fell across the road, since the canopy of leaves had been wilted by the heat of the sun. The buttercup blossoms had closed, and the touch-me-nots no longer stood erect, where their heavy cluster of blossoms fell limp beside their strong stems. Even the minnows were no longer stirring where the sunlight had warmed the pools. They sought the cool, shadowy pools beneath the willows. The crawdads had changed their homes from under the hot rocks on the bed of the stream to the cooler, more comfortable homes under the alder-shaded pools. If this is a lesson in life, I thought, it's a hard one. I even thought of running away from home. I thought about taking to the hills and going in any direction that would take me from home. But I thought I couldn't stay away from my father, who had no part in making me take this sack to Mr. Conley and explain to him what I was doing. When I thought about leaving home, I didn't think I could stay away from my small brothers and sisters either. I was hurt, and I wanted to make Mom feel sorry for sending me back. After I thought the whole thing over, I knew there wasn't anything left for me to do but face Mr. Conley and explain how I had brought him a sack with a hole in the bottom. Now I could see his little store. It was in sight under the big sycamore tree beside the stream. I could see a couple of horses with saddles on and hitched to sycamore limbs. There was a team of horses hitched to a wagon parked in front of the store. My luck, I thought. A whole lot of people in the store, and they'll hear what I say. But I will wait until they leave before I give this sack to Mr. Conley, I determined. When I reached the store, I stopped on the outside and looked in. There were only 3 men inside. It was a little store, and Mr. Conley didn't have a big trade. I watched Tom Eversole pick up his basket of groceries and walk out the door past me. I went inside where Mr. Conley was counting the eggs Manuel Green had brought. I waited until he had traded his eggs for groceries. Then he put his basket on his arm and left the store. Only Tom Crum was left. He asked for a sack of meal and a sack of flour. When Mr. Conley picked up the sack of flour for him, the flour came through the corner of the sack. "Whoops!" Mr. Conley said as he put the sack down fast as he could. "Tom, did I tear that sack?" "Don't think you did," Tom Crum answered. I just bought that sack this morning from Shan Potterjay. He brought me 10 sacks, and I didn't inspect them all for holes." Mr. Conley and Tom Crum hadn't seen me yet. "I filled the 10 empty sacks I got this morning," Mr. Conley said. "See what it cost me because I didn't look at all those sacks?" "You can't trust young'uns nowadays," Tom Crum said. "They're not raised right." "No, I don't guess you can," Mr. Conley said. "But I'd miss 'em if they didn't come in here and trade me sacks, roots, herbs, eggs, and pelts. I like to have 'em around." When Mr. Conley had finished saying these words, he saw me with an empty sack in my hand. He looked straight at me over his glasses. Tom Crum turned to look. "Want something, Shan?" Mr. Conley said. "Yes," I said. I gave him the sack. "Just one?" he asked. "Yes," I said as he opened to look for the holes. "No use look for holes," I said. "You won't find it." "Oh," he laughed and started over his candy case. "No candy for that one, Mr. Conley," I said. "Why, what do you mean?" Mr. Conley asked. "Don't you want a penny?" I brought it because—" I started, but I couldn't finish. "You've got a good mother," Mr. Conley said. I hadn't told him Mom had sent me back. I wondered how he knew. "There'd be a place reserved in heaven for your mother, Shan." Then I remembered the thoughts I had about Mom. I remembered how I had thought of running away from home to make her sorry. You'll always be thankful your mother made you do this, Tom Crum said, as he rubbed his big hand over his bearded face. It's a lesson in honesty you won't forget. It gives you a foundation from your fingertips to your toes. Mr. Conley, I'll bring more sacks to pay for the flour you lost, I said. That's all right, said Mr. Conley. I went out the door, down over the steps, and ran all the way home, and the tears were dried by the wind as I ran. Through the gate, with one bound I was on the porch, and I said, Mom, I'm home. And I knew what Mom meant when she said it'll make you feel good to make your wrongs right.